Hey everyone, welcome to the Way Wednesdays virtual Midrash. We are going through the Torah portion today. I'm excited to get into Numbers chapter 30, and we'll see how far we get. Some of the latter parts are kind of some lists, so we might not quite get to those. But there's a lot of great stuff to talk about. As always, it's the Bible we're talking about, right? It's God's word, so it's very cool. And we keep studying it because there are ever more discoveries that we make, more ways we can apply it to our lives, and it's all good stuff. It's unfortunate that we ever got the word law, because then you're like, you got to do the law, but it's like, no, I want to do God's instructions, right? This is kind of like his list of here's the things to do for a successful life, right? Here's some good things, and here's some things you shouldn't do if you want to have a successful life, right? If we put it in those kind of terms, then it takes on a whole new significance. And then you're like, yeah, well, of course, why wouldn't I do that, right? So let's get into it. If you guys have questions, comments, put those in the chat. I'll try to get those at the end, and we'll go for it, okay? So Numbers chapter 30. By the way, make sure to like and subscribe. It helps the algorithm. All right, then Moses spoke to the heads of the tribes concerning the children of Israel, saying, this is the thing which the Lord has commanded. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. All right, so this is obviously another important passage. He hasn't talked about this yet. All right, and so this is something that needs some explaining. But I mean, he's already said that if you make a vow, you're supposed to keep it. But now we're going to get to the part about the woman. All right, so that's really important. We'll get that in just a second. But obviously, if you make a vow to bind yourself by some agreement, what should you do? You should do it, right? And this is where Jesus said something very profound. Let your yes be yes and your no be no, right? So in the first century, there were some people who were saying, yeah, I promised, but I didn't pinky promise. Okay. I promised, but I didn't swear in my mother's grave, right? That was essentially what they were doing. They're like, yeah, I promised I would do this, but I didn't swear by the gold on the temple, right? And Jesus is like, which one is more important here, the temple or the gold that's on it, right? So they were looking for ways to get out of it. And Jesus put it really simply. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's that simple. Okay. You don't have to go beyond that. And that's exactly what this is saying. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. Keep your word, right? He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. This is mega important, right? Mega importante, right? Because when you don't do what you say you're going to do, well, we call that person a liar sometimes. We begin to lose trust in that person. If you've ever had a construction project where somebody says they're going to do something and then they don't, that can be quite aggravating, right? And that's why we start leaving negative reviews. When we buy products and they say that they're going to do something and then they don't do something, well, that gets a negative review as well. The whole principle of, doing what you say you're going to do, whether you're a product or a product maker or a service provider, you should be doing what you say you're going to do. Not only for those two things. I mean, even when I write up titles for my YouTube videos, I really want to have truth in advertising, right? So I do my very best to come up with a title that is true to what I'm going to be talking about. Just random clickbait doesn't quite seem fair. And I think we all get a little bit annoyed by that. So, I do my best as well to title things. And so, what I say I'm going to do, that I'll do. Or we call that just basic integrity. And that is a principle that God is very much into, is basic integrity. Do what you say you're going to do, right? And of course, that is what we heard from Balaam concerning God. Is God a man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should say and not do, right? Not fulfill it? Well, of course not, right? I mean, God is this other being, right? I mean, he's this whole other level of being, and he is not a man, right? Let's go back to that passage because it's such a cool passage. Of course, it's not in 24. It's going to be in what, 23, I think. There you go. It's around there somewhere. I knew that. Of course I did. Well, I think I did. Maybe I didn't. I don't know. Maybe it's 22. Maybe I'm forgetting altogether. This is terrible. I hate that. But I'm so close. It's in there somewhere. All right. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just like spacing out right now. What can I say? Um, yeah, it's in there. I mean, I won't keep looking, but it's in there. All right. You'll have to just trust me on that one. Yeah. So it's in there somewhere. But anyway, I digress. Okay. So we said all that. Sorry for a little escapade there. Or if a woman makes a vow to the Lord and binds herself by some agreement while in her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and the agreement by which she has bound herself, and her father holds his peace, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement with which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father overrules her on the day that he hears, then none of her vows nor her agreements by which she has bound herself shall stand. And the Lord will release her because of her father overruled her. Okay, that's really interesting, right? Now, you know, to some degree, in our present day, because of some feminist talk and different things, they're like, well, this is so wrong. A woman should be able to do what she wants to do. Well, wait a second. I mean, you go back to Proverbs 31, right? A woman had so much freedom to do all kinds of stuff, right? She wasn't being limited by any means. But whose protection is this for, right? Is it for the father's protection or for the daughter's protection? Well, maybe a little bit for the father's protection, but it's really for the daughter's protection. Because while she's in her father's house, if she makes a vow and then she's not able to perform it, guess what? Well, the father's going to be responsible for that. So that's one thing, right? That's something to consider, is that he will have to bear the responsibility for that, right? So I think that kind of makes sense. And we understand this, right? We still have these basic laws that when there are children living in your house under your care, they're called dependents. And it's not just that you boss them around all day, but you're looking out for them, right? And you, as a father or a mother, you want your children to succeed and to be blessed. And so if they make a binding agreement with somebody, you're like, wait a second, this is not a good agreement. You're going to get yourself into a lot of hot water. We need to cancel this right now. That's a good thing, right? And that is what God is saying. Well, Moses, right, speaking for God here, that's what he's saying about the vows. Is if a woman makes a vow in her father's house, right, she's under his authority, and he's not browbeating her. That's not the point. But he's looking out for his daughter. That's what we're talking about. All right. And that's a good thing. All right. Now, having established that, let's go on. Now, if indeed she takes a husband while bound by her vows or by a rash utterance from her lips by which she bound herself, and her husband hears it and makes no response to her on the day that he hears, then her vow shall stand, and her agreements by which she bound herself shall stand. But if her husband overrules her on the day that he hears it, he shall make void her vow, which she took and that she uttered with her lips, by which she bound herself, and the Lord will release her. Interesting. Okay, so same scenario, but this time not her father, but now her husband. Okay, here's just a wild question. Do you think the husband, ideally, not perfectly, but ideally, loves his wife? I'm going to take a stab in the dark here. Yes. Okay. I'm going to assume that probably yes. Okay. And he wants what's good for her, right? Now, he can hear it and he can say nothing. And if he says nothing, then she's totally free to do what she wants, right? That's the whole Proverbs 31 thing. Let's take a look at Proverbs 31. Let's see all the things that a woman, a married woman, was able to do. All right. So, who can find a virtuous wife? Her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband safely trusts her, so he will have no lack of gain. All right. So the husband trusts her, right? You see that? That's important. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. That's important too. She seeks wool and flax and willingly works with her hands, right? She's like the merchant ship. She brings food from afar. She also rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and a portion for her maidservants. She considers a field and buys it. From her profits, she plants a vineyard. Now, do you see that? She considers a field and buys it. Why? Because we've already been told her husband trusts her, safely trusts her. Okay. So if the husband is going to overrule his wife, this is not an everyday occurrence. Like every day he's like, nope, 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 can't do that. According to Proverbs 31, this woman has a husband that trusts her because he knows that she does him good and not evil all the days of her life, right? So he understands that she's doing good stuff and making good decisions, right? So he's like, go for it, right? And so she can go buy a field. She's not saying, hey, I mean, I don't know, maybe we're not getting all the details, obviously, from this, but it says that she considers a field and she buys it, right? So it sounds like she's out doing her stuff. The husband's doing his work. She's doing her work. And she's like, I think I want this field. It's a great deal. And I'm going to do it, right? And she buys it. Now, let's say that she bought this and then, they come home at night and she says, hey, honey, I bought a field. And, they talk about the details. And he's like, I don't think this is a good idea. I really don't. I think this should be, we should get out of this one. All right. Well, what's interesting in sales, I used to do sales some years ago. There was the 3-day right of rescission, right? It was the worst thing that I just hated. I'd make a sale and then they would cancel. And I was like, oh, but that's part of the law is that kind of that buyer's remorse thing, right? So if people, buy something today, especially if it's a service that's maybe in your home or something, and it hasn't been installed or whatever, you got 3 days to say, you know what, I don't think I want it. And then the contract is null and void. They have to write in, say, I don't want this thing. And then it's over. Okay. But after that, it sticks. So what God is doing is he's putting a provision in here. If she goes out and she buys a field or she buys whatever, or she makes some kind of a vow, and then, they come home, they talk about it. That wasn't really a good idea. I want to annul this. It's kind of like this little bit of buyer's remorse, and she can be released from this. Now, the man, he doesn't kind of get so lucky, right? He's got to keep it, right? And there are times when I've wished I could get out of a vow, right? Right. So if a man makes a vow, he's got to do what he says he's going to do. Now, there are ways to legally get out of contracts, right? There's no problem with that. But you can't just unilaterally say, I'm annulling this contract. You'd have to go through other legal means to be released from a particular contract. But if it happens the same day, then the husband can say, nope, we're not doing this, right? This contract is annulled. He would, of course, have to go tell the people that she had made this deal with, right? But again, it was only 1 day. And unlike today, you have the 3 days right of rescission that you can decide that you don't want to do something, right? So this is really a way of protecting members of society. In this case, of course, women, daughters and wives. Now, if she's not under her father's house and she's not married, right, she can do as she wishes, right? And those vows are going to stick. So also any vow of a widow or a divorced woman by which she has bound herself shall stand against her. If she vowed in her father's house, in her husband's house, or bound herself by an agreement with an oath, and her husband heard it and made no response to her, and did not overrule her, then all her vows shall stand, and every agreement by which she bound herself shall stand. But if her husband truly made them void on the day he heard them, then whatever proceeded from her lips concerning her vows or concerning the agreement binding her, it shall not stand. Her husband has made them void, and the Lord will release her. Now, this is what I think is really amazing. Let's go back to the first couple. All right, Adam and Eve. You remember them. So Eve decided to do a little something, which was take a bite out of a certain fruit, right? And then what did she do? She took it and she handed it to her husband who was with her. All right, let's take a look at that. You guys know the passage, of course, but let's take a look at it. All right. So it says, the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise. She took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. All right. And it says then and the eyes of both of them were opened and they knew that they were naked. All right. Now, of course, there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff that can be said about that, but we're only looking at the legal aspect of it right now. So the woman did something first, right? She made a vow in a sense, right? She consumed of this. She consummated the deal, if you will, so to speak. And then her husband was right there watching. He wasn't far off. I've heard people teach about this. Oh, Adam was on the other side of the garden. That's nonsense. It says right here that he was right there with her. Okay. It says that in the Hebrew. All right. So, and she gave, to her husband, Ima Vayochad, right? Who was with her, and he ate. Right. So he was right there. And this is why I think that Adam was being a little bit shrewd, if you will, thinking, I'll let my wife eat it first and I'll see what happens. And if she doesn't die, then I'll eat it. Okay. Now notice when she eats it, nothing happens, right? Nothing happens. But when her husband ate it, the eyes of both of them were opened, right? So when he ate, that is the time when their eyes were opened, not before, right? So when she ate, nothing happened. She didn't die because based on Numbers chapter 30, the principle is that if a woman makes a vow, in this case, a foolish vow, and her husband hears it, he can annul that decision. So I think, so the way I look at it is if Eve had made some foolish choice, Adam was on the other side of the garden, let's say, and she eats of this thing, and she's like, "Hey, Adam, guess what? I just ate of the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it's really delicious." And he might have, he could have said, "Oh no, Eve, what have you done? What have you done? You weren't supposed to do that, right? Oh no, I mean, what do I do, right?" Well, we have the answer, right? It says, "And the Lord will release her," right? So the husband can annul the vow, and the Lord will release her. So again, this is all hypothetical, but had she eaten without his knowledge or consent, then once he discovered what she had done, then he could have said, "Lord, I don't know the rules here, but this doesn't seem right." And according to what God is telling us in Numbers 30, he would have released her. Okay. So, of course, it didn't happen that way. Adam was right there with her. Again, this is why I think he was waiting to see what was going to happen to her. And when nothing happened to her, why did nothing happen to her when she ate of this? Didn't we go over this already? Right? For God knows that the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you'll be like God. Okay. Well, let's go back here. All right. Has God indeed said, "You shall not eat of every tree of the garden"? The woman said, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die." All right. Now there's discussion whether they're allowed to touch it or not. Did God say this? But it's not the point, right? If you eat it, you die. That was the word. You eat this, you die. Okay. That's basically what we're getting. Let's go back, right? So, and the Lord commanded the man, saying, "Of every tree of the garden you may eat freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. From the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die." Okay. So that was the commandment. Don't eat of this thing. Okay. If you do, you'll die. So why didn't Eve die when she ate of it? When she ate of it, not her husband. Well, my answer would be because legally she was under his authority, and until he executed that action, she could have been released. She could have been forgiven of that action. But once he said, "Okay, I'm good with that," and then he did it as well, then the eyes of both of them were opened. Right? See the difference? And that is when they both got in trouble, is when he ate of it. Now, of course, what does he try to do? He tries to pass the buck completely. "It's not my fault, God. It's your fault. And it's the woman you gave me," right? That's what he's trying to get at. He's trying to pass the buck. It's the fault of the woman that you gave me, Lord, right? But Numbers chapter 30 tells us, nope, you can't do that, men. You got to You got to man up. You got to be strong here and be the leader, because the buck's going to stop with the man. Okay. And that's not always a fun position to be in. Sometimes we wish we could let the woman have the final say. And I don't know how else to explain this so it doesn't sound misogynistic or something like, oh, men are just ruling over women. It's not like that. Sometimes it's a tremendous burden to carry the authority and to know that the guy is responsible here, right? You have to make decisions that affect a lot of people, and you want to get it right, of course, right? And it's much easier to say, oh, you decide, right? Because then they bear the responsibility, or at least that's what you think, right? But God is telling us to man up and to carry that responsibility. That's why he created us as men. Okay. All right. So all this stuff, right, that she can be released from it, right? The husband can make them void and the Lord will release her. I think that is what could have happened with Eve, but of course it didn't happen, right? Every vow and every binding oath to afflict her soul, her husband may confirm it, or her husband may make it void, right? To afflict her soul? Well, I would say eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is kind of afflicting your soul. And her husband, her man, Adam was her man, right? He could have said, well, he did say yes, but he could have said, no, don't do that, right? He had that option, but of course he didn't. Now, if her husband makes no response, whatever, to her from day to day, and then confirms all her vows or all the agreements that bind her, he confirms them because he made no response to her on the day that he heard them. But if he does make them void after he has heard them, then he shall bear her guilt. Ooh, okay. So who bears the guilt of Eve? Adam does. Yeah, that's right. Now, obviously, Eve had, difficulty in childbirth. That's what God said, because you've done this, right? But ultimately, it falls back on the man, right? And the man bears the guilt. So this is a way to protect the woman, not to enslave her, but to protect her, right? You got to look at these things differently. These are the statutes which the Lord commanded Moses between a man and his wife, between a father and his daughter, in her youth, in her father's house. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel. Afterward you shall be gathered to your people. So Moses spoke to the people, saying, arm some of yourselves for war, and let them go against the Midianites to take vengeance for the Lord on Midian. 1,000 from each tribe. Of all the tribes of Israel you shall send to the war. So there were recruited from the divisions of Israel 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war. Then Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 from each tribe. He sent them to the war with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, with the holy articles and the signal trumpets in his hand. Now, let's see, 1,000 from each tribe. That's kind of interesting. So that'd be 12,000, right? We see something similar, kind of akin to this in Numbers, or in Revelation chapter 7 and chapter 14, right? There you have 12,000 from each tribe. So you have 144,000, whereas here you have 1,000. All right. Could there be a correlation? Maybe, right? It's entirely possible that there could be a correlation between here. And they're sent out for war, right? Now, what are the 144,000 sent out? It's not entirely clear. We do have theories, right? I've got my theory. Okay. I think they're going to be, well, kind of X-Men, if you will, to some degree. But I don't have a lot to base that on, right? It's really it's a fair amount of speculation. And I got little hints here and there. I think because they're the first fruit of the resurrection to God, I think that means that they're going to have their new bodies first. Could I be wrong? I sure could, right? So I don't hold to that very strongly, but that's my theory. So again, there could be a correlation here. And so they go out and they warred against the Midianites just as the Lord commanded Moses, and they killed all the males. They killed the kings of Midian with the rest of those who were killed: Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. Balaam, the son of Beor, they also killed with the sword. Wait a second. Balaam. So Balaam was hanging out with the Midianites. Oh, yeah, that's right. What did Balaam do? He told the Midianites to send in the women to seduce the men. Hey, boys, come here. Let's show you how we worship our gods back home, right? And of course, that led to the whole incident with the Israelite man and the Midianite woman who were moaning in the tent of meeting, right? A very holy place. And they were absolutely desecrating it to the nth degree. And then a plague came out, and it was Phinehas who went and thrust them through, all right? And the plague stopped. All right. All that was because of Balaam's counsel to them to do what he did, obviously, right? So that, of course, that's a very, very bad thing, right? So we're going to see that in just a couple of verses here. So let's keep on going. And the children of Israel took the women of Midian captive with their little ones and took spoil all their cattle, all their flocks, and all their goods. They also burned with fire all the cities where they dwelt and all their forts. And they took all the spoil and all the booty of man and beast. Then they brought the captives, the booty, the spoil to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and to the congregation of the children of Israel, to the camp in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. And Moses, Eleazar the priest, and all the leaders of the congregation went to meet them outside the camp. But Moses was angry with the officers of the army, with the captains over thousands and captains over hundreds, who had come from the battle. And Moses said to them, have you kept all the women alive? Look, these women caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam, right? I've been talking about this, that Balaam was not able to come directly against God's people. So he had to find a back door. He had to use a Trojan horse, as it were, to attack them from the inside so that they would open the gates of their own fortress and say, come on in and attack us. That's essentially what happened. Because as long as there was a threat from the outside, God was the ring of fire around them and nothing could touch them. But then basically the Midianite women came and knocked on the door. Hey, will you let us in? And they're like, oh, sure, come on in. All right. And they came in, and then God's like, you know what? I'm kind of ticked off about this. And then God was fighting against Israel. And if God's fighting against you, you're toast. Okay. So this is what the counsel of Balaam did. Keep that in mind. You are protected from the devil when you're walking according to God's ways. He can't touch you. But when you start to open yourself up, well, then you become very vulnerable. And it might just be a little crack here and there. Look, we're all guilty. Okay. I'm not pointing any fingers or casting any stones. I'm just saying, let's be careful, right? Because it's so easy. And Satan, sadly, is a master at disguise, at deception, and all that stuff, right? We know that, right? So this is why it's good for us to study and to remind ourselves of what not to do. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man intimately. But keep alive for yourselves all the young girls who have not known a man intimately. And as for you, remain outside the camp 7 days. Whoever has killed any person, whoever has touched any slain, purify yourselves and yourselves, your captives, on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Purify every garment, everything made of leather, everything woven of goat's hair, and everything made of wool. Then Eleazar the priest said to the men of war who had gone to the battle, this is the ordinance of the law which the Lord commanded Moses. Only the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, the tin, and the lead, everything that can endure fire, you shall put through the fire, and it shall be clean, and it shall be purified with the water purification. But all that cannot endure fire, you shall put through the water. Oh boy, why did he have to talk about being purified through water? Right? Okay, so who talks about this? Well, of course, Peter talks about this, right? And it's one of those passages you're like, I know it's good, but I don't really like it, to be honest. Okay, so he tells us, in this you greatly rejoice, for now, though a little while, if need be, you've been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ, whom having not seen you love, though now you do not see him, yet believing, you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Of this salvation, the prophets have inquired and searched carefully, who prophesied of the grace that would come to you, right? And of course, lots of amazing stuff here. So that gold that is tested, right? It's tested. The genuineness of gold is tested by fire, right? So basically, gold can get when it's soft, it can get dirt in it. So you can melt it, and all of the dirt, the garbage, the dross comes to the top, right? And that's how it's made pure. It has to be completely melted down, because then all the impurities go out of it, right? So then they let it cool, then they would do it again, and they would give me a little bit more, right? And it'd scrape off that dross. That is what God is doing with us when he lets us go through trials. Now, having said that, I'll be the first to admit, right? I'll raise my hand nice and high. I don't like trials. I think they're lousy. I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy the testing phase. I don't like, being put through the fire and all this stuff. But I do know that it's good. I know that God is not wasting anything, right? And so this is one of those things we have to keep in mind when we're praying, right? Is to not lose heart in what we're praying for, but also understand that God is going to answer it when he decides to answer it. But he's going to allow the process to have us go through the fire, right? And again, I wish there were a shortcut, but I just can't think of any. There are no shortcuts to the purification process. Just like you can't purify gold unless you melt it down and you scrape off the dross, and you do that a few times until it's been refined many, many times. All right. And there's so many passages that are talking about this purification process, right? So it's a very good process. It's kind of a painful process, but so we see this again. Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy. Yeah. So be joyful, right? Going through a trial. Well, I know it's not that we thank God. Oh, Lord, thank you. I'm enjoying this trial so much, right? I don't imagine Daniel was thanking God when he got thrown into the lion's den. Oh, thanks, God. This is really fun. Okay. But he was thanking God while he was in the lion's den, that God was faithful, right? He was praying to God, and during that experience, thanking God that God is faithful, God is good, that God is sovereign, that God is a protector, he's a strong tower, right? I seriously doubt Daniel was saying, oh, thanks, God, that I got thrown in the lion's den. I don't know. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You're not going to say, oh, thank you, Lord, that my house burned down. I'm so happy about that. Thank you, Lord, that I lost my job. That's the greatest thing ever, right? Thank you, Lord, that my car was destroyed or was ripped off. I don't think any of us are going to say thank you in those moments. And I don't think we're called to say thank you for those bad actions. But what we can do is we can say, thank you, God, that despite this lousy thing that just happened, you're still with me, that you love me, that even though this thing happened, you are going to bring some good out of this that I cannot yet even imagine. And I thank you for that, right? So that's the attitude that we want to have. And it's all about being tested by fire that we see so beautifully in Numbers, right? Is that everything that can be tested by fire, well, it should be tested by fire. And if it can endure the fire, then put it through the fire. But all that cannot endure the fire, you shall put through the water. And you shall wash your clothes on the seventh day and be clean, and afterward you may come into the camp. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, count the plunder that was taken of man and beast, you and Eleazar the priest, and the chief fathers of the congregation, and divide the plunder into two parts between those who took part in the war, who went out to battle, and all the congregation. And levy a tribute for the Lord on the men of war who went out to battle, one of every 500 of the persons, the cattle, the donkeys, and the sheep. Take it from their half and give it to Eleazar the priest as a heave offering to the Lord. Remember, heave offering is something you're presenting to the Lord. All right, that's all that's happening here. It's a presentation offering. Yeah, and from the children of Israel's half, you shall take one of every 50. Okay, so huge difference, right? So of the men that actually went out to war, you're taking one out of every 500. Okay, For the people that didn't, it's 1 out of every 50, right? So it's a multiple of 10, right? So it's 10 times more that is being taken from the people that did not go to war but stayed back in the camp, right? So that kind of makes sense, right? Because they didn't have to put their lives in danger or do anything. They got to stay in the camp, right? So they're paying a larger percentage of a tax or a levy that's going to be paid to the Lord as a heave offering. And why would you pay the Lord when they went out to battle? That's interesting. Why would they give any sacrifice to the Lord when they're the ones that went out and had to fight this battle? What did God do, right? Well, that's interesting. Let's explore that idea. Okay. So, all right, so they're going to take all this. They're going to keep charge of the tabernacle of the Lord. So Moses and Eleazar the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses. The booty remaining from the plunder which the men of war had taken was 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 persons in all, of women who had not known a man intimately. And the portion for those who had gone out to war, was in number 337,500 sheep. And the Lord's tribute was 675. The cattle were 32,000, of which the Lord's tribute was 72. The donkeys were 30,500, of which the Lord's tribute was 61. The persons were 16,000, of which the Lord's tribute was 32 persons. So Moses gave the tribute, which was the Lord's heave offering, to Eleazar the priest, as the Lord commanded Moses. Now, just in case you have any weird thoughts here, that the prisoners that were taken, they did not kill them or anything like that, right? There was always a ransom paid for a person. So you never sacrifice a person. That was never, ever, ever, ever the case in God's economy, right? Now, under Solomon, it came into Israel, and they started to do that. Actually, under Jephthah, that was probably the first human sacrifice. Bad story. Join me this Shabbat, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, so anyway, so Moses gave the tribute, which was the Lord's heave offering, to Eleazar the priest, as the Lord commanded Moses. And from the children of Israel's half, which Moses separated from the men who fought, now the half belonging to the congregation was 337,500 sheep, 36,000 cattle, 30,500 donkeys, and 16,000 persons. And from the children of Israel's half, Moses took 1 of every 50, drawn from man and beast, and gave them to the Levites, who kept charge of the tabernacle of the Lord, as the Lord commanded Moses. All right, now again, why would you give anything to the Lord? The answer is coming. Then the officers who were over thousands of the army, the captains of thousands and captains of hundreds, came near to Moses and said to Moses, "Your servants have taken account of the men of war who are under our command, and not a man of us is missing." Oh, well, now that's interesting. So they went out to war and nobody died. Well, that's worth quite a bit. So maybe God was actually fighting on their behalf. It kind of sounds like it. And it was only 12,000 men who went out against a force that was much larger than them, right? Many times larger than them. And none of them died. It sounds like God was with them. So maybe God does deserve a little bit of a heave offering, okay? Because, yeah, God was actually part of this battle. Therefore, we have brought an offering for the Lord, what every man found out of ornaments of gold, armlets and bracelets and signet rings and earrings and necklaces, to make atonement for ourselves before the Lord. So Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from them, all the fashioned ornaments and all the gold of the offering that they offered to the Lord. From the captains of thousands and captains of hundreds was 16,750 shekels. The men of war who had taken spoil, every man for himself. And Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from the captains of thousands and of hundreds, and brought it into the tabernacle of meeting as a memorial for the children of Israel before the Lord. All right. Give to God what's God's, and he'll take care of you. He will take care of you. All right. Now the children of Reuben and the children of Gad had a very great multitude of livestock when they saw the land of Yazer and the land of Gilead, that indeed the region was a place for livestock. Now this area that they're going into is actually the land of Bashan. That's interesting. That's where they're going to encounter, or they did encounter, Og of Bashan, right? That was the area, right? That's where they are right now. And this is also where Elijah, Elijah the Gileadi, right? This is where he comes from. Interesting. The children of Gad and the children of Reuben came and spoke to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, and to the leaders of the congregation, saying, Atarot, Dibon, Yazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Elealeh, Shebam, Nebo, and Beon, the country which the Lord defeated before the congregation of Israel, is a land for livestock, and your servants have livestock. Now, therefore, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants as a possession. Do not take us over the Jordan. So they're asking pretty please, right? If we have found favor in your sight, right? Im matzanu chen beinecha, right? This is a very polite way to say, hey, pretty please, if we're all good. So they seem meek when they ask this. Moses said to the children of Gad and to the children of Reuben, shall your brethren go to war while you sit here? Now, why will you discourage the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land which the Lord has given them? Thus your fathers did when I sent them away from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and they saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the children of Israel, so they did not go into the land which the Lord had given them. So the Lord's anger was aroused on that day, and he swore an oath, saying, surely none of the men who came up from Egypt from 20 years old above shall see the land of which I swore to Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, and Joshua the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed me. All right, now I'm going to stop really quick right here. What do we see here? Right? Surely none of the men who came up from Egypt from 20 years old and above shall see the land of which I swore to Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. So sometimes people ask, is there an age of accountability in the Bible? Often we think it's 12 or 13, right? When you have the bar or bat mitzvah, you become a son or a daughter of the commandments. And so it's often assumed that that is the age of accountability. But according to God, the age of accountability is actually 20, right? So when the spies came back and the 10 gave a bad report, if you were under 20, right, you're 19 or younger, then you got to go into the promised land, even though you had to wait 40 years, but you got to go in eventually. Whereas if you were 20 and older, you were going to die in the wilderness during those 40 years of wandering. Okay. So, yeah, it's too bad. So that means that some guys only made it to 60, right? That was as old as they got, and then it was over for them because they were held accountable. They were counted as adults at the age of 20. Frankly, I think that's a much better age than what we are doing here in the United States. Okay, now it's crazy because you're considered an adult at 18. We're happy to send you to war at 18, but you can't drink till you're 21. I mean, something doesn't quite seem right about that. But anyway, I digress. All right. So God's age of accountability is 20 years old and above. That is when he considers a person an adult. All right. So if you're a 19-year-old, I'm sorry, God thinks you're still a kid. And that might be a good thing. All right. That just might be a good thing. All right. So the Lord's anger was aroused against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. And look, you've risen in your father's place, a brood of sinful men, to increase still more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will once again leave them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all these people. Then they came near to him and said, we will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones. But we ourselves will be armed, ready to go before the children of Israel until we have brought them to their place. And our little ones will dwell in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until every one of the children of Israel has received his inheritance. Well, you got to give it to these guys, right? They're committed. For we will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan beyond, because our inheritance has fallen to us on this eastern side of the Jordan. Then Moses said to them, if you do this thing, if you arm yourselves before the Lord for the war, and all your armed men cross over the Jordan before the Lord until he has driven out his enemies be before them, and the land is subdued before the Lord. Then afterward you may return and be blameless before the Lord and before Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. But if you do not do so, then take note, right? So this is a contract that Moses is essentially establishing. It's an oral contract at this point, but it got written down eventually, right? But it's an oral contract. But if you do not do so, then take note, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. Ooh, if there were ever words that sting, right? Those sting. Be sure your sin will find you out. It'd be a good idea if more bank robbers thought about that, more murderers thought about that, more adulterers thought about that. Pretty much anybody that sins, which is, I think, all of us. If we would all think about the consequences that our sin will find us out. That's a bummer. We kind of think it won't when we're doing things. Nobody's going to find out about this. But eventually, your sin will find you out. So you always want to be blameless and righteous. Then you don't have to worry about it. All right, you're good. All right, so do this. But if you don't, your sin, that you broke this covenant, will find you out. Build cities for your little ones and folds for your sheep, and do what is proceeded out of your mouth, right? And what did we start with, right? That a vow. You got to do what you said you're going to do, right? So this is a vow you're taking here. This is now a formal contract between God and you guys, all right, Gad and Reuben. You better do what you said you're going to do, because if you don't, it's going to find you out, right? There's going to be a day you got to pay up, and you don't want to do that. And the children of Gad and the children of Reuben spoke to Moses, saying, your servants will do as my Lord commands. Our little ones, our wives, our flocks, and all our livestock will be there in the cities of Gilead. But your servants will cross over, every man armed for war, before the Lord to do battle, just as my Lord says. So Moses gave command concerning them to Eleazar the priest, to Joshua the son of Nun, and to the chief fathers of the tribes of the children of Israel. Now notice, Moses doesn't just unilaterally say this and nothing happens, right? He's got to then tell people down the chain of command. So this is registered. This is it's noted, right? It's going to sort of be notarized, if you will, right? That's essentially what's happening. This is being put on public record. And that's why it's so important to have contracts on public record, because then there's a objective third-party source that can say, this is what both of you guys said. That's why we have registrars. That's why we have county clerks that take in contracts that people are signing. The county clerk or the registrant has no interest in this. It's just, that's a place of keeping records, and that's important if there's ever a disagreement, right? And so that's a very important part of any society, or it's going to utterly crumble. And Moses said to them, if the children of Gad and the children of Reuben cross over the Jordan with you, every man armed for battle before the Lord, and the land is subdued before you, then ye shall give them the land of Gilead as a possession. But if they do not cross over armed with you, they shall have possessions among you in the land of Canaan. Then the children of Gad and the children of Reuben answered, saying, as the Lord has said to your servants, so we will do. We will cross over armed before the Lord into the land of Canaan, but the possession of our inheritance shall remain with us on this side of the Jordan. So Moses gave to the children of Gad, to the children of Reuben, and to the half tribe of Manasseh, the son of Joseph, the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, king of Bashan, and the land with its cities within the borders and the cities of the surrounding country. All right, now, we've talked about King Og of Bashan, right? He's a giant. Bashan, it comes from the Akkadian word bashmu, it means snake dragon. And this is a theme that we find quite often coming up in Scripture, more than you might realize. And Mount Hermon was known as the Mount of Bashan. This is, in my mind, 100% where Jesus had the transfiguration. I would argue that's also where Satan took him to a very high mountain to show him all the kingdoms of the earth, right? That's the highest mountain in the land of Israel. We know that there are, or were, ancient temples up there. There ruins have been found there. And a stele was found talking about this one named Batios, who was Enlil, who was Satan, was the god of death. And according to Ugaritic texts, they talked about Mount Hermon, that there was a deified god of the dead who resided there. And he also resided in Ashdod and Edrei. That's interesting. And his name was Og. Okay. So I guess the Bible's been confirmed many times, right? But all that was in the land of Bashan. And so this is where these guys are setting up camp, right? They're like, we're going to stay here. It's nice here. It's good fertile ground. We're going to stick around. All right. And the children of Gad built Dibon and Atarot and Aroer and Atrot and Shofan and Yazer and Yogbeha, Bet Nimra, Bet Haran, fortified cities and the folds for sheep. And the children of Reuben built Heshbon and Eleah and Kiriataim. Sorry, just looking at something. Nebo and Baal Meon, their names being changed, and Shibma, and they gave other names to the cities which they built. And the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, went to Gilead and took it, and dispossessed the Amorites who were in it. So Moses gave Gilead to Machir, the son of Manasseh, and he dwelt in it. Also Yair, the son of Manasseh, went and took its small towns and called them Havot Yair. All right, we're gonna come to that a little bit later in the book of Judges. All right. Then Nobah went and took Kenat and its villages, and he called it Nobah after his own name. All right. Well, pretty cool stuff. Boy, of course, there's more that could be said, but I want to get to your questions, guys. We're going to actually stop there in the text because the other parts, well, there's a lot of lists, and we're going to call it a night on that. All right. Someone says, I never make a promise I can't keep. Well, that's awesome. But I'm supposing we've probably all made a promise or two that we intended to keep, but we weren't able to. So you got to be careful. This is from Jay Jones. Does the father's authority, which is presented for the daughter, also apply rightfully to the son? Appears one-sided otherwise. Yeah, it does appear one-sided. What I would suggest is that the daughter would stay in the father's house until she got married. That was basically the scenario, right? Now, the son would often stay there as well, and he was under that same authority. Whether he could go and make, decisions unilaterally for himself without his father's consent, the text does not say. And so because of its silence, it would suggest that he could go, if he was older than 20, he could go and then make his own decisions. But chances are, if he's older than 20, he's probably already married, right? So it's very unlikely. It's not a very usual situation. We're going to have, a millennial still sitting at home in his father's basement. Okay. He would get out and go do his thing and start his own family. That was basically the idea. All right. But that's a great question. All right. Let's see. Nana Montana says, my dad was head of the household when I grew up. Of course, I was in the 60s. His authority was respected by the household. Well, that's good. Some things were good back in the 60s, okay? Some things were good. She also says, we see ourselves having authority over our children as we are the parents, but we'll forget that we are also considered children in the eyes of Yah. Well said. Yeah. Wasn't Caleb a Gentile? Yeah, he was a Kenizzite, and he was brought into the fold. He became a full member, right? So kind of interesting, right? That this guy is actually a Gentile of the nations, and he becomes one of the foremost leaders, very respected among the children of Israel, right? So you don't have to be Israelite to be an Israelite, right? You can be grafted in. I hear some concepts there that we've seen otherwise, right? Very cool. Oh man, thanks guys. This is always fun. So glad you tuned in. Make sure to share this with others so they can also enjoy this content. Make sure to give it a thumbs up and do subscribe if you haven't yet. If you want to be part of the Way congregation, part of the ministry, you can download the app. That'll keep you abreast as to what we're doing. You can give through that. You can listen to the Bible through it. We have the Torah portions, so you can where am I supposed to read? If you want the app to read those Torah portions to you, it'll do that too. All right, so keep that in mind. Also, a couple things to consider. We have a few more spaces left for Sukkot. If you're going to attend, you can come join us. Check out thewaycongregation.com. And we're going to Israel in 2024. So I hope you guys can join us, go with us in 2024. So we've got some time, right? Don't stress yet. We got enough time that you can start putting stuff in your piggy bank to save for that and go with us. It's going to be a fantastic tour. I can hardly wait. But again, go to thewaycongregation.com. We have a tab that says the Israel trip, and you get all the information on that. So it's not too early to sign up. You can do that already. I hope you'll come with us. As always, God bless you. And I encourage you